about this report and the work LBNL is doing in this complex space. Lisa, take it away.
Thanks, Dominic. This is Lisa Schwartz at Berkeley Lab, and thanks to NARUC for hosting this webinar and our presenters from Xcel Energy, Walmart, and World Resources Institute. The Future Electric Utility Regulation series is designed to inform ongoing discussions and decisions by public utility commissions, policymakers, and the electricity industry. And we use a multiple perspectives format to present different views on the future of utility regulation and business models and the trade-offs in achieving a reliable, affordable, and flexible power system. Thanks to the U.S. Department of Energy for funding this series. Next slide, please. An advisory group helps prioritize what topics we cover. It provides guidance on how we cover them and reviews the draft reports for us. Members include public utility commissioners, representatives of utility reports so far, including today's topic, renewable energy options for large utility customers. Our next report will address state and electric utility practices for all source competitive solicitations. Julie, passing the mic to you.
All right, thank you, Lisa. We have today, first, Jeff Lyng and Dan King about Xcel's perspective on renewable energy options for large customers. Jeff is Xcel's Director of Energy and Environmental Policy, and Dan is Team Lead, Product Strategy and Development. One of Jeff's prior roles was serving as Renewable Energy Policy Manager in Colorado Governor Bill Ritter's administration. And some of you may know Dan from his former role as Program and Policy Director at the Midwest Renewable Energy Tracking System, MRETS. Our second presentation will be from Steve Criss. Steve is Director, Energy and Strategy Analysis for Walmart Stores. In a past position, Steve was a senior analyst and economist at the Oregon Public Utility Commission. Steve will be talking about Walmart's strategies for achieving its renewable energy goals. Our final speaker will be Lori Bird. Lori is Director of the U.S. Energy Program and the Polsky Chair for Renewable Energy at the World Resources Institute. She was previously a principal analyst in the Markets and Policy Group at NREL. Lori will be talking about city and county renewable goals. Lisa gave an overview of what the report is about, and by the way, I've moved on to the next slide. And this slide shows the 3 questions that were answered in the report from the perspectives of Xcel, Walmart, and the World Resources Institute in regard to cities. Next slide. Please use the chat box to send us your questions anytime during the presentation. And at the end of all 3 presentations, we'll begin the Q&A session. Jeff and Dan, are you ready to go?
We are. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, you're welcome.
So we really appreciate the opportunity to be a co-author on this paper and to present to you today. I'm going to talk just very briefly about some of our corporate carbon dioxide and renewable energy strategies and really try to yield the bulk of the time to Dan King, who's in our product development department, and to allow him the time to talk about design principles, some of the products that we have available to customers, and really get into some of the details that are we discuss in our section of the report. First, a little bit about Xcel Energy. We are a dual fuel utility. We serve electric and gas service to 3.6 million electric customers and 2 million gas customers across 8 states. And since this is a renewable energy conversation, I think it's important to mention our Steel for Fuel strategy. That really is a project that we are coming to the close on with 12 wind projects across 7 states. We'll soon have close to 10 gigawatts of wind capacity on our system. And as you look at our service territory there, that map, you'll know that it overlays really quite well with the wind resource potential in the U.S. So that's been a big part of our strategy, a big part of our base renewable offering for all of our customers, and it's a big part of our carbon dioxide reductions as well. Moving on to the next slide, slide 14. We have 3 strategic priorities as a company: leading the clean energy transition, enhancing the customer experience, and keeping bills low. And as you think about those 3 strategic priorities, in the context of the clean energy transition, it really does require that we affect a renewable pathway that's balanced, that's affordable, and that's reliable. And it's been our experience that utilities are really places of innovation. We want to be the problem solver for our customers, whatever their goals are. Obviously, the conversation today is high renewable energy goals, and so we endeavor to have solutions for our customers in that regard as well. I want to talk on the next slide, 15, about a commitment that we made at the end of 2018. And we really set a new goal that by 2030, we would reduce our carbon dioxide emissions 80% from a 2005 baseline. We further made an aspiration that by 2050, we would deliver 100% carbon-free electricity to our customers. We think this is a bold goal. We think it's the right goal, and we're working hard at implementing it. Importantly, this is the system we're designing for everyone, and that means for all hours of the day, 8,760 hours of the day. We know that we're going to need some new form of zero carbon, 24/7 technologies to remove the last 20% of that carbon dioxide from our electric system. But for the next decade, and really into that 2030 target, we know that we'll have to and will be integrating a tremendous amount of new renewable energy onto the system. And with that current technology, we see a clear pathway to an 80% reduction. Moving to a cleaner energy mix, slide 16, really in the next decade and achieving a 60% renewable target, we expect to add close to 14 gigawatts of new wind and solar. So this is over the next decade, a pathway with existing technologies, with wind and solar and batteries, a role for natural gas, changing operations for coal units, achieving an 80% reduction with current technology. Again, that 60% renewable energy by 2030 is for everyone, not just the voluntary program participants. So I think it's really important in this conversation as we go through to talk about for customers that are endeavoring to get to 100% renewables or very high levels of renewables, the base offering, our base offering is approaching 50%, would be 60% renewable by 2030. So it's really about voluntary programs that would allow customers to go further, faster, and Dan will talk about a few of those products. Moving to the next slide, as you all know, the private sector has been very active in this space, and I think we're going to hear more about that through the webinar. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the corporate commitments that have been made by companies that are headquartered in our service territory, but it's really a small subset of the entire marketplace in this regard. And finally, when we talk about large customers, we really have to as well make sure that we're designing products and programs and services for communities. Across our service territory, we serve 16 communities with renewable energy goals. As you can see in the chart on the right-hand side, most of those are 100% renewable energy goals. Likewise, we serve an additional 16 communities that have carbon dioxide reduction goals. And there's some overlap here between the groups, but an interesting mix. Many of those carbon dioxide reduction goals are pushing 100% as well. So this is a really important driver for us, responding not only to private sector commitments, but helping our municipal customers achieve their carbon and renewable energy commitment. And so I think I'm going to yield the rest of my time now to Dan, really to discuss our voluntary programs, some of the design parameters that we think about and discuss in detail in the report, and the products that we have available now. Dan?
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for that overview. And here we can see now the slide 18, that slide that Jeff was just speaking to. And I think, one of the big points from what Jeff has presented is, we have very ambitious goals set around carbon reduction for very intentional reasons. Our customers also have really ambitious goals, and they're structured in a variety of different ways. And we want to create the structures that are necessary to share this credit and co-create this carbon-free energy future that we're working towards. So what I'll discuss is kind of two things, our work on clarifying how customers can claim credit for these system renewables that are rapidly increasing, and also some of the highlights of the products we have for those customers who want to go further and faster. So we can go to the next slide here. These are not all of the corporate renewable buyers principles, first of all, and I will just touch on this briefly, not to steal Lori's thunder, because WRI was, of course, instrumental in bringing these forward. But I do want to point out that there was a really helpful framework in place for us to be designing to in terms of what were the core tenets that we build into new products. So these are really some kind of sub-principles of one of those, but other than these, we need to build kind of cost-competitive products that are attractive for our customers to participate in, a variety of term lengths for the contract lengths, access to projects that go beyond business as usual, and that's really what these 3 points are speaking to here. In terms of products that are energy bundled with the RECs, mechanisms that will prevent any double counting of the energy so that the participants can have confidence in the claims that they're making, and location of the generation within a reasonable proximity of the customer within the system that is actually physically delivering their energy. Of course, one of the buyer's principles that resonates with us as a utility is the opportunity to work with utilities and an effort to fairly share the costs and benefits of the program structure. So you can go to the next slide. So this is just an overview of our renewable energy options that we offer customers. So at the bottom there is our certified renewable percentage that I'll talk about a little bit more in the coming slides. But what we've been trying to put forward is a new kind of accounting mechanism or metric that can kind of clarify and that our customers can make that are based on REC retirements for the system renewables that they're getting as part of their regular service. For customers that want to go above and beyond, farther, faster, we have a variety of options. These are divided up here first by the big split of whether it's on-site generation or a subscription program. Beyond that just big divider of whether it's on-site or off-site, some other considerations that go into deciding which path to take towards meeting a large customer's renewable energy goals include location, not just on-site or off-site, but these different offerings have different requirements on the proximity of the generation to the customer. The ability to make claims and what types of claims you can make. So along the right side there, we indicate for which of these programs RECs are retired on behalf of the participants, so that there's attribution of that REC retirement. You can see that some of them customers receive an incentive payment in exchange for those RECs going to all of the retail customers. So in those cases, a customer can still make claims about supporting renewable energy development, participating in solar energy generation, but they can't make the same claims in terms of using that renewable energy. So our product offerings that are built around helping our customers make those claims around using renewable energy include that bundled energy and RECs. A length of commitment is another consideration here. These range from, some of them can be month to month or a single event subscription up to 10 years or more subscription contract lengths. And also just these all have different pricing structures and cost expectations. So we'll go on to the next slide here. So I want to just give a quick overview of what the certified renewable percentage is, which is a new reporting structure, a new metric that we're putting out there to help clarify how customers count their system renewables. This is not a program that customers enroll in or subscribe to. It's simply something that we report out, and customers can use it and apply it to their claims if they choose. This is backed by a combination of RECs that are retired for Renewable Energy Standard compliance, representing energy that was delivered to our retail customers. And we have also begun voluntarily retiring additional RECs on behalf of all of our retail customers to reflect when the percentage of renewable energy goes above and beyond that Renewable Energy Standard. So broadly speaking, the way this is calculated is we take all of the renewable energy generated in a given year. We make adjustment for any RECs that are attributed to specific customers through our voluntary programs, any RECs that are sold or that are sold or transferred to wholesale customers. We try to do a rigorous job of taking all of that into account. And then we divide that by the total energy used by our retail customers, and this gives us that certified renewable percentage. We can go to the next slide. And so this shows, we began doing this in Minnesota and Wisconsin. We're working towards hopefully doing it in Colorado soon. And so for 2018, the first year we offered in Minnesota, this percentage was just above the Renewable Energy Standard, around 26%. But we're quickly moving to this year where we expect it to be around 40%. And as Jeff was saying, over the next decade, this will increase to around 60% renewable. So the main point here is that our customers are not starting at zero in terms of the system renewable energy that they're receiving, and we want that to be reflected and provide the ability for customers to make those rigorous claims if they choose. Next slide. So I'll just go into now a little bit more detail on Renewable Connect, which is from that chart a few slides ago, our product that is really the one that is most designed for helping our large customers reach their high renewable energy goals. So the way this is structured is it is energy and RECs from specific projects. It's a combination of solar and wind in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and just solar in Colorado. We offer flexible terms, again, ranging from that month to month, or if a stadium wants to go renewable just for one specific event, like the Super Bowl, it can do that. When we also offer 5- and 10-year terms. There's a choice of subscription size. Customers can opt to be 100% renewable through this program, or they can subscribe to a fixed number of 100 kilowatt-hour blocks on a monthly basis to subscribe a portion of their usage to this program. The pricing is set up front. There's known pricing with credits for fuel and capacity. So the fuel credits, those bill credits are not known at the outset. Those are adjusted through time depending on what the actual fuel costs are. So there's nothing preventing overall cost savings over the lifetime of the product, but that's also not guaranteed. It depends on what happens with the fuel costs. One key element of this that I do want to highlight is what we've called the neutrality adjustment, which is built in. And what this does is it's intended to prevent non-participants from experiencing any upward rate pressure as a result of this offering. What it is intended to incorporate are things like line loss costs, renewable integration costs, system balancing costs, the curtailment of these resources. So that in addition to a pass-through of the resource costs is what goes into the pricing that the customers see. So we can go to the next slide here, which just summarizes some of our key takeaways here that we see this transition to high renewable energy really needs to be affordable, balanced, and reliable. Our base renewable offering is rapidly increasing and set to be around 60% by 2030. we've really adhered to some of these external principles through the corporate biodiversity principles and have worked with groups in our service territory, for example, the Minnesota Sustainable Growth Coalition, to engage in a collaborative effort to design these products to make sure that they meet our customers' needs. And we have this carbon-free aspiration for 100% carbon-free electricity for the big grid. So I'll leave it there unless Jeff has any parting thoughts, and looking forward to hearing our other speakers.
Well, go ahead, Jeff. Did you want to add something?
I do not. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff and Dan. Webinar participants, I wanted to remind you to type any questions into the chat box. I see a couple questions there now, and we will be saving those for the end. Our next speaker is Steve Chris from Walmart. Steve, are you ready to go?
I am.
All right.
All right, so I'm Steve Chris. I'm Director of Energy Services for Walmart. Next slide, please. So just an introduction. Our stores and hopefully our .com business and are using it often. But we also have Sam's Club, and we have a number of other online businesses that we own, and just wanted to give you a sense of that. Next slide, please. But when we talk about energy management for Walmart, what my team and then the broader energy team based in Bentonville does is we serve our retail footprint in the United States and Puerto Rico. So in terms of what we serve, we have stores in all 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, over 5,300 retail units, over 176 distribution centers and logistics facilities, and we employ over 1.5 million associates just in the US market. Next slide, please. So talking about renewable energy, in 2005, we set an aspirational goal to be powered 100% by renewable energy. There's no timetable on that goal, and in 2016, we set a goal with a timetable, which is by 2025 to be supplied 50% by renewable energy, and then also to use a combination of energy efficiency and renewable energy to reduce emissions in our fleet by 18%. We were the first retailer to have a science-based target, so that was a pretty cool thing for us. Next slide, please. In terms of how we've executed against that goal, we have over 360 installed on-site solar projects, and we are continuing to develop more. We have a large on-site wind turbine that's on a distribution center in California. It's a 1 megawatt wind turbine. So far, we've done 19 energy storage projects, and we've also done a number of off-site energy contracts. There are a couple flavors to this that we'll discuss a little more in a second, but we have competitive market contracts that serve load, and then we have a number of utility partnerships or programs that are either in flight or in the pipeline, and then we've done virtual PPAs as well in several states. Next slide, please. Also, the business has an initiative called Project Gigaton, and this addresses supply chain sustainability over 6 different pillars. Energy is one of those pillars, and so we work with our suppliers and they report up their use of renewable energy and what they're doing on energy efficiency, as well as activities in agriculture, waste, packaging, deforestation, and product use. If you want to learn more, there's a website link at the bottom of the slide. I invite you to check it out. So in terms of renewable procurement, general parameters that we look at, and you'll see this in any of the testimonies that we file. First, we don't enter into premium-only structures or programs that only result in additional cost to our facilities. So historically, we've said that this is, we don't just buy RECs. There are some utility opportunities where it kind of looks like that, but it's more complicated or more nuanced than that. But from a general standpoint, if we look at the value proposition of the program and it's only going to add cost, we won't do it. I can't get that approved. Number 2, we look for renewable resources that deliver industry-leading cost, including the renewable and project-specific attributes like renewable energy credits. So, if we're in a market where we see solar coming in, $20 to $30, and a program comes in at $50, that's certainly going to be a concern for us. It's cost. We have everyday low cost leads to everyday low prices. That's how we operate our business. And so that's how we look at procurement as well. And then number 3, participating customer takes on the incremental risk of being served by that resource instead of or in addition to the otherwise applicable resource portfolio. So we understand that a number of these programs do contain some amount of risk within the value proposition, and that's okay, because number 4 is participating customer receives any potential benefits brought about by taking on that risk. And so this exists a bit in the traditional rate making paradigm of the opportunity but not the guarantee. So we look for programs where we have an opportunity to save, understanding that there's not a guarantee. And so when we're looking at program structures, that plays into it. And then finally, we can't enter into programs with terms in excess of 15 years. And there's a couple of pieces on that. First is just how we look at internal contracting, and 15 years is an important breakpoint internally. And then the second piece really is, the business changes over time. And so contracting for something beyond 15 years may be too long to really align well with where the business may go in that time. Next slide, please. So there are 3 channels to secure resource supply, plays into the slide that we talked about before. In terms of offsite resources, in deregulated retail markets, we can structure renewable energy projects to replace other energy that we purchase, so that's physical and on the bill. We have a wholly owned subsidiary called Texas Retail Energy. They're a competitive retail supplier and serve us in 11 states in the UK. And so they can go and have the project contract structured to go into their supply stack to serve our stores. And so that with it actually replacing the energy, it's not just the renewable energy value that you get, but you also get the value of procuring less energy from that market, which means that you directly get that carbon value as well. Also in competitive wholesale markets, we do virtual power purchase agreements. Excuse me. For on-site procurement, this is mostly the behind-the-meter solar, where we're replacing grid energy with energy from the on-site resource. Big focus for us is reducing operating costs for the site in addition to the renewable energy. And net metering compensation isn't really a driver for us. Unless we build a solar system into the parking lot as well and do canopies as well as rooftop, it's fairly hard for us to build a system big enough to export energy. So we're looking at the economics of the resource against the otherwise applicable utility tariff, or in competitive markets, what our market purchases would look like on the generation side. And then finally, that third channel is the utility partner. And so this is where we work with the utilities to develop structures within the confines of the regulatory compact in each state. And so we've done a number of these. Georgia, Alabama, take service from Puget's program up in Washington, currently have Florida Power and Light and Public Service, or PNM in New Mexico, in front of the regulator trying to get tariffs approved. So a lot of work on that. And so this is, green tariff or a sleeved resource. This could also be a shared resource like Renewable Connect that Dan talked about earlier. And then as well as on-site partnerships where we contract with the utility to have them site a renewable resource on one of our sites. Next slide, please. And so one of the big questions in the paper was, how can utilities help? And being that, I tend to get philosophical sometimes, the first step isn't, oh, let's do a tariff or let's do this or that. The first step is really about utilities creating a customer-centric culture within their customer service and regulatory operations. Because those are the organizations that have the best conversations, that have the best connection to their customers, know what products to do, and know how to get them approved. And so it's really that high level, but it's also that important, because there are utilities that we've dealt with that have wanted to do a program but never had a conversation with a customer to get it done, and then the program ends up being something that we actually have to go in and oppose because it doesn't work. And not only doesn't not work, it may set a dangerous precedent. So it's really important to have that spirit in both the customer service side, and I think by and large, utilities are very good at customer service for large customers. We definitely appreciate what they do. but moving that customer centricness to the regulatory organization tends to be the biggest challenge. And so part of it is just, simply don't look at us as ratepayers. Ratepayers are the people you send bills to make sure that you recover costs. That's not the kind of relationship that drives successful programs. What drives successful programs is looking at us as customers, who are people or organizations that you have a customer relationship with, and to whom you want to meet their needs. So next slide, please. So as we look at process, some just key operational principles that we found to be successful. First, communication and openness are critical. You have to have the conversation, and then when you have the conversation, be straightforward and be honest, and really be forthright about what your barriers are. Listen to the utilities to find out what their barriers are, and set a transparent playing field so that you can really move things forward. If you play hide the ball, there's a good chance that you won't get to the end zone. Sorry for the football analogy. It's been a good week for LSU. Just my side note. There's no single best structure that can be used for any utility. Every state is different, and it's important to understand that. It makes it a little tough sometimes on a best practices standpoint, but it's just part of the reality of it. And associated with that is really understanding and working within each utility's unique system and regulatory and rate-making structure to get to success. If you know what the utilities and the regulators are used to dealing with, then you can better create a solution that fits within that and get it done. So from a customer perspective, the opportunity points, especially for large customers, are going to be the key account managers that you deal with on every whole range of day-to-day things that you work with with the utility. Edison Electric Institute for the investor-owned utilities has a key accounts program. They have 2 massive workshops a year, which are a really good opportunity for customers and utility reps to have conversations. The co-ops run a similar conference every winter, so it's the Touchstone Energy Net Conference. And then American Public Power Association also has a Customer Connections Conference where the folks who are with the municipal utilities can meet with customers. Next slide, please. And so this is just kind of mapping the opportunity and figuring out, what are the things you need to think about when you're putting a program together. Customers and utilities both have needs and constraints, and getting to success really requires, understanding what all those things are and then how you address each one. In the paper, we get into a little more depth on this, but we wanted to put this up there just so you can see, sort of what that looks like, and just highlight a few of the things that we have to deal with. And a lot of it goes back to the program parameters that I discussed before. So next slide, please. So options and implications. It all boils down to one simple Venn diagram. What are the solutions the utility will offer? What are solutions that a regulator will approve? And what are the solutions that customers will buy? Got to hit all 3. And so that is the challenge of the process and what we work to achieve. Next slide, please. In terms of the structures, resource ownership from Walmart's perspective, we're open to utility ownership as well as utilities procuring PPAs for programs. And then we also support programs that allow customers to bring your own resource. So that would be the Green Source Advantage program in North Carolina, or the Rocky Mountain Power programs in Utah. Value proposition, there's a cost and a credit. The cost side, and we want that, everything should be cost of service based, really. So the cost side reflects the cost of the resource plus any additional costs, admin or procurement. And then the credit side really reflects the underlying utility cost and rate structures. And this is one of those touch points for regulatory familiarity, where a program has a better chance of acceptance if the credit can be structured in a way that regulators have worked with and understand. Next slide, please. And so, what we found from our experience is the best starting point really is what's avoided on the margin by using the resource instead of other generations. That's going to be avoided fuel, purchase power, and the variable generation costs. Some programs, so Renewable Connect in Colorado is one of them, do bring in some value in around capacity value. And so if the program resource does create some avoided capacity value. You know, it's nice to capture, but this oftentimes is one of the more controversial pieces of it, both in terms of what that number really should look like, as well as, you know, when you look at programs and you don't want to shift costs, when you start messing with fixed asset costs, and, you know, utilities, you know, they earn their profit on rate base, and that's where the cost shifting kind of plays into it. You want to avoid controversy, and that can create controversy. So its application thus far has been fairly limited. Next slide, please. And so the resulting credit structures can be simple to complex. Very simple. You know, if you look at Westar and KCPL in Kansas, we basically call it the fuel swap. We're going to pay a renewable fuel rate in exchange for the otherwise applicable fuel rate. So that's a really easy thing to do for utilities that have standalone fuel rates. More complex ones, Georgia Power would be an example of that, where in each hour for every kilowatt hour, megawatt hour for the program, you pay the program cost, and then you receive the hourly liquidation on the Georgia Power System Lambda, or a couple like the Ameren, Missouri, and Dominion, Virginia programs. It's based on market. So there's ups and downs to both. I mean, ultimately, the closer you get to that marginal cost point, the more it's going to reflect cost. But the more complex it is, the harder it is for a customer to kind of understand and forecast the potential cost impacts. So, you know, we're lucky to have the resources to be able to model out a lot of fairly complex stuff, but you know, we're fairly unique in the space. So finding that balance is tricky and important, but ultimately, you know, sometimes, you know, the reason why the Georgia Power one works is because most customers on their system are already real-time pricing customers for the large CNI. So we have a sense of what's going on their system on an hourly basis already for just our regular bill pricing. So it makes sense within that construct. Next slide, please. And how to get it done today, important. Speed to market is important. Empowered regulators are also important for renewable program development. Just the competitive market analogy in competitive retail markets, you know, we can choose products that better meet our needs, including but not limited to pricing and generation mix. And through renewable programs, we're relying on the utility to mimic these choices. And, you know, historically, regulation has served as a substitute for price discipline of competitive markets to protect customers from monopoly power. As we look at the renewable program space, you know, regulators are really stepping in as an enabler of products that provide benefits similar to products that we could get in a competitive market. You know, getting renewables in a competitive market transactionally is fairly easy. You know, you find supply, we have demand, you know, you negotiate price and terms and stuff, and you're done. We don't have that capability within a regulated paradigm, so we need the regulator to enable that and enable it fairly quickly. Next slide, please. And so regulators really need to have the authority to approve the programs in a time-efficient manner, but also providing that interested stakeholders have a process to provide input. I mean, we've had a couple of programs that have been filed and approved so fast that, you know, key things that we would have pointed out weren't able to be addressed, and then we weren't able to use the program. So, you know, you definitely, again, it's a balance, but you know, if you get a program and you sit on it for 2 years, that's not really progressing things the way that they really need to be progressed. And then given that most programs are 10 to 20 years in length, it's really not possible to fully anticipate and quantify all costs and benefits. So it's important to understand that and, you know, sort of understand the uncertainty and work within it, and then use cost of service principles to really ensure that participants bear the full economic value of the transaction, both from the cost and the benefit side. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Our next speaker is Lori Bird from the World Resources Institute. Lori, are you ready to go?
I am. Yep.
All right.
Great. Okay, so next slide. I'll just give you a little bit of background on the World Resources Institute before I get going here. WRI is a global sustainability nonprofit. It's actually rather large. It's even bigger than I thought when I started. I've only been there just over a year, but we've got, and I think when I started, they told me about 800 employees, and now the number is 1,000, or over 1,000. So we're growing pretty quickly, I guess. The budget is about $150 million, so it's not a small organization. It is global. We have offices around the world in India, China, Mexico, Indonesia, Europe, and some other places. We do work on both energy and climate change, but also things like oceans, forests, and food issues globally. So I'm leading the U.S. energy program at WRI, and a lot of the work that we are doing is focused on, well, a lot of it in the past has been with corporates and corporate renewable energy procurement and helping to form the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. And now we've kind of switched focus to be working more with cities. So I'm going to be talking about cities here. We have a large project right now funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies called the American Cities Climate Challenge. It's a very big program doing more than just renewables, but we're leading the Renewables Accelerator jointly with the Rocky Mountain. There's 25 cities that were selected for the American Cities Climate Challenge, so we provide intense technical assistance to them, and then we're working with 100 cities across the U.S. to facilitate peer exchange so that they can move forward on their renewable procurement goals. So highly related to what we're talking about today. All right, next slide. So cities have become a big player in this. You can see this timeline below about the number of cities that have made 100% renewable energy commitments. 16 in 2016, and this 140 number is actually out of date, right? So it's more than 150 cities have these 100% renewables goals. And sometimes they're goals for their municipal facilities only, but often they're also for the whole community. And there can be different time schedules for. Minneapolis has a goal of 2022, I think, for their municipal facilities, and then 2030 for the community-wide. Okay, next slide. So we've heard a lot about this, so I'm just going to cover it really quickly, but cities have a lot of the same needs as large corporate buyers. We already just heard from Chris at Walmart hearing about their needs. I think so they're really interested in new renewable energy projects. They also are seeking a large volume of energy to meet these large-scale commitments. They also would really like cost savings from renewables over time. They're very cost-sensitive. And the more cost certainty, that they struggle with too much risk associated with projects as well, and have some more contracting challenges and limitations, I think, just procurement challenges than corporates do. So some of the differences, I think, between what a city, the challenges that they have versus a corporate, one, they really want local projects, so they have even a stronger preference, I think, for local renewable facilities to be constructed. I think corporates often want that too, but cities even more so. They typically have existing loads, so we've seen some of these actions like corporates that if it's a new data center, they can do some sort of project for this new load, which sometimes is easier to accomplish, whereas cities are not in that situation. And as I said, they have more limitations on just their procurement processes and how they get things done. So next slide. So what can utilities do to help meet their needs? Chris mentioned that talking to the customers before utility tries to launch a program is really good. And I think it's also important to not only talk to one stakeholder or a very limited number of stakeholders, but to get those perspectives right. So if the program is going to be trying to serve both corporates and cities, and they have some different needs, trying to get input from multiple stakeholders is really is good and better for a utility. In terms of the likelihood of success will be higher if there's these kinds of discussions in advance. Chris already made that point. But so what can the utilities do? Provide new renewable facilities, partner on local projects, make sure the products can be replicated, and also just making sure that they're driving long-term solutions, right? So generation that will be around for a long time will have long-term greenhouse gas emissions benefits. So, and it could be things as well as just the renewable energy projects, but storage and demand response programs and things like that can also be part of the mix here. Okay, next slide. So, and I think cities are interested in a variety of different types of options for their own procurement. We've heard that from Chris was talking about this as well. So for their municipal facilities, often they're interested in on-site, or they're many of them are looking at community scale renewables, but also need to do large scale purchases. So have looked at green tariffs, or some cities are looking at virtual power purchase agreements to do, you know, the heavy lifting in terms of the large volume of renewables that they're going to need to meet their loads. So I'm going to focus in on the next few slides on the green tariffs, as we've done a lot of work in that space, and many cities are looking at that, looking at utility solutions, and trying to meet a large volume of their needs through those kinds of programs, which is not to say that these others are not important, but are often only able to meet a smaller amount of their loads. Okay, next slide. Oops. Okay. So we've seen a lot of growth in green tariffs. In fact, WRI has tracked their growth over time. It has a publication that we just updated that's now joint with RIBA that's online called Emerging Green Tariffs. And you can see it provides details on the tariffs that are available by utilities across the country in terms of their various the terms of the tariff, the duration, and just all the requirements, if that's helpful. And I'll make sure to get that link added to the slide. Sorry, I didn't do that. But we have seen quite a rapid growth, actually, in the number of these programs that have been offered in the last few years. Now there's 19 utilities offering 31 programs, and quite a bit of renewables that are being procured through them. Now we're at 3.2 gigawatts of renewables purchased through these utility green tariff programs, and that's up close to a gigawatt from the previous year. And we had about eight green tariffs approved or pending approval in 2019. So next slide. So just to talk about the different types a little bit, Chris mentioned this a little bit because he was talking about there's some that are market-based rates, and then there's more what we call more of a traditional subscriber model, where you know the utility offers a tariff model, and then folks sign on to the tariff that they so there's multiple entities that are subscribing to the tariff to procure the renewables. Maybe it's 100 or 200 megawatts that they'll bring online. The first, I kind of went out of order in terms of the flow of this slide, but the first row is actually individual deals. So we've also seen many corporates largely negotiating with the utility to specific PPAs. Chris talked about this a little bit already. So that also happens as well, in many cases where there's new load that the customer is bringing to the utility. But many of the green tariffs are really fall into this what we're calling a subscriber model. So they're not necessarily linked to wholesale power market rates, but it's more of a defined tariff. Okay, next slide. So just a little bit more here. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to spend much time on this, but just to make the point here that there is quite a bit of detail, and Chris talks about this. It's hard to, you know, say what's the best practice for design of these programs and nationally, because the specific local jurisdiction really makes a difference. But we do see, and we do see a range of the types of terms here. I think one thing that has been interesting is the contract term. I think we have been seeing more push towards a little bit shorter contracts under these. Chris mentioned that they're only interested in 15 years or less, but we've seen some programs where they offer options for different types of term lengths to accommodate different customer needs. One of the issues too, I think that we've seen in the last couple of years is many of these programs have been selling out very quickly. So the utility will offer it and then it'll become fully subscribed very quickly, and many customers, struggle to kind of get in the queue there. So they have been quite popular in many cases as well. Next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on that given our time. So I'm going to just talk really quickly about two examples of cities procuring through green tariff programs. One is Bellevue, Washington, that purchased through Puget Sound's Green Direct program, and they did a 20-year contract for 70% of the city's municipal load. And then they expanded that to the fire department and parks and some other departments within the city. So, and they do anticipate some cost savings over time through this program. The first 10 years they expect a premium, but after that they are anticipating some savings through the program. But quite a few municipal governments have signed on to that program. Next one is Minneapolis. Next slide. They have also procured through Xcel Energy's Renewable Connect program, which we heard about earlier. They're doing a 10-year contract. That is offered at a premium, and they have been able to offset some of that premium through purchases through the community solar garden subscriptions. But that has been, the premium nature of that has been a little bit of a challenge for figuring out how to structure that. So next slide. So we are seeing cities participating in these green tariff programs, but some of this is relatively new. We're also seeing some innovative products in the marketplace and innovative structures that I think are pretty interesting. What's happened with Salt Lake City and their community-wide renewables program has been interesting to watch. So Salt Lake City has a 100% renewables goal. They did a feasibility study and worked with their utility, and they're working with other cities within Utah, and they got legislation passed to allow a 100% renewable energy offering to them if they wanted to. And that will be supplied, the city is actually supplying the renewables for that program. So that's a new one to watch. It's sort of like community choice aggregation that we see in some states, but a little bit different because it's working with the utility. Other innovation that we've seen is more on the corporate side. I've been leading this, but there's discussion of trying to do things in this area about 24/7 renewables procurement. So trying to address the issue that the renewables aren't always available, and that procuring renewable energy might be relying on fossil generation within the mix. So this is a bit of a challenge. Google's been trying to do a number of things to make sure that their purchases of energy match more closely with clean generation. And they just announced, I think it was this week or maybe it was last week, about a new big solar project. A large storage project tied to, I believe it was a solar PPA. So they're looking at different ways of trying to match their load more closely with generation. One of the challenges with this, I'll just say, I do think there could be limitations to this kind of approach. Well, one challenge is that these offerings are not really available to customers in the marketplace, so there is need for new approaches to be provided for customers to really do this. Another potential issue is that it might be more cost-effective to manage this, to have the utility manage this variability on the system-wide basis rather than each customer trying to match all of their load, because customer loads vary over time, right? And sometimes if you add them all together, some of that variability can balance out, right? So having each customer match, all of their energy with the renewables on a 24/7 basis could be a more costly approach than perhaps trying to utilize some of the aggregation potential on the grid. We are almost at time, and I have a couple more slides. well, let's go. I'll try to do them really quickly to see if we can have some questions. In terms of pace and cost considerations, I think things are interesting. We're seeing a lot of interest in taking early action, I think because the cost of renewables have fallen so quickly. So we're seeing that on the part of cities, but they are tied more closely to the targets that they have. As I mentioned earlier, they have two types of goals typically for their municipal loads and then community-wide, starting with their municipal loads. So most of the cities that we're working with are on that municipal facility side right now. But the real issue here is, I think, the utilities often, many states and utilities have 100% clean energy goals, right? And everyone's trying to move in the same direction, but at different time scales. And so that's, I think, what we're starting to see in the marketplace now. Google has already achieved their 100% goal, and many of the customers are trying to move as fast as they can, and to the extent that it's cost effective, they're doing so more quickly. Next slide. So my last slide, oh, I forgot about this one. I thought this was on impacts. Lisa, do you want me to really wrap up?
Well, I think we're out of time. Let's turn it back to Dominic for some guidance and see if we have time for any questions.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Yeah, I'll just say that, these slides will be available. I had just a couple of slides talking about the impacts and what are some of the solutions, things that customers or utilities could do to address the challenges of dealing with 100% renewables. So, and those will be available for folks to read. But thank you very much.
All right, thank you, everyone. Yeah, we are running out of time. I think we can do one wrap-up question that we had come in. And let's see. So let me just pull up the questions really quick. Hold on one second. And this one is for Walmart. Just one second. How do you resource supply mechanisms dovetail with on-site efficiency improvements, especially for facilities that have some on-site renewables? What are you doing to best integrate them with your on-site usage?
So that's a great question. One of the things that we do in recognition of both current and future energy efficiency efforts is when we look at particular utility procurements, we will size it to 75% of the load that the utility serves, so that we've built in some space to account for the effects of energy efficiency. In terms of putting it up against on-site solar, that's going to depend on the resource or the region it's in, and whether or not it's, so if you're looking at, the DREG markets and competitive retail generation, the shape of the load matters a lot more than how things are under utility right now in terms of matching. And so we're going to look more closely at load shapes when we're sourcing to a resource to serve our supply stack for DREG versus when we look at the utilities, just because most utility programs aren't matched on an hourly basis, so becomes less of an issue. But that's a really good question.
Okay, and then just one wrap-up question for all of you. What are some early important steps we can take to better match loads and revenue generation output on a more granular level rather than broadly over the entire year? If anyone wants to jump in.
So this is Steve again. I think ultimately, long-term, that's going to be an important thing to do. At this point, the challenge is that a number of large C&I customers have round-the-clock businesses, so we can't necessarily reshape our businesses to perfectly match a solar or wind shape. So resource diversity is important in order to have, you know, hopefully renewables producing on the grid at all times, and that's something that we have to look at. Then we also have to figure out what capacity looks like, you know, going into the future. You know, whether that's storage or if it's some other zero carbon resource that does that. So I think that's one of the next challenges of the next 15 years. I think is working through that 24/7 aspect of utility service as it relates to clean and renewable energy.
This is Lori. I'll just chime in too that I think we are seeing more folks looking at storage because of the falling cost of it. I think there's a couple of other things that could help in this space too. One is more looking at flexible demand products. So could utilities be offering solutions that encourage load shifting to enable more renewables and tie that with renewable offerings? I do think there's potential there. And also with the, as electric vehicles evolve, there's potential for incorporating some of those loads that could match with some of the renewables. So those are a couple of things.
Yeah, and this is Dan, and I'd say that we're actively working on those types of products that incorporate demand management and can take carbon signals and incentivize different behavior on the end. Trying to avoid curtailment of renewables, and can we incentivize additional usage at that time, and maybe shift load from other periods of time to that.
Okay. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you for joining us. Please join us for additional webinars this month. Get more information and sign up for them at www.naruc.org/CPI. We look forward to having you. Thank you a lot.